Welcome to the NYU Steinhardt Jazz Interview Series. And tonight we have jazz guitarist, composer, bandleader, Steve Gadd. Steve, thanks for coming tonight. And as always, we try to get like a historical perspective of your career. And there's a point we talk to the students, and we say there's a point where somebody opened a door for you, or you made a move. I know for you, you decided to move to New York and dig in here back in the 70s. But let's talk about your early life, and you come from a musical background. So maybe you can talk about how you grew up in Los Angeles.
Well, I'd be happy to talk about it. I wish it was a short story, but I'll do the best I can to keep it concise. When I was growing up in Los Angeles, I came from I guess a pretty normal family: father, mother, my sister Lori, and me. Lori is 2 years younger than me. And I was born in 1947, and my father was a famous songwriter. His name is Sammy Cahn, and he spells it C-A-H-N, which I guess I could explain how this happened to me. But growing up, I never thought there was anything really unusual about my life or my life with my father. And as life was going along, I started to realize at times like something's different about this. And my sister and I, we went to all public schools, public grammar school, junior high, high school, and but during those years, like my father, he was nominated for the Oscar 30 times. He won 4 times. He won for Three Coins in the Fountain, All the Way, High Hopes, and Call Me Irresponsible. And he won an Emmy for, Love and Marriage. And so, it was kind of strange. And I remember as a kid, I'd go to school, and I don't remember exactly, but let's say the Oscars were on a Sunday night, and then go to school on Monday. And this big kid, Jeff Kirschbaum, he was like, if you imagine Dave as like a youngster and me as a little kid, and I'd come to school, and Jeff Kirschbaum would be waiting for me, and he'd say, "Hey, Cahn, your old man lost." So my dad lost 26 times. So, I dreaded going to school and seeing Jeff Kirschbaum all the time. And so, I didn't really think there was anything too different about the way I was growing up. And then, as I get older, started having more friends, and friends would come over, and I wanted to shoot baskets and play wiffle ball in the yard and throw the baseball, throw a football. That's what I wanted to do. And so, be in the kitchen with milk and cookies and stuff, and the kid, a friend, whoever it happened to be, would go to the bathroom or something, and he'd come back and he'd say to me, do you know who's in the living room talking with your father? And I said, no, who is he? He says, Dean Martin's in there. And I said, yes, so what? But he's like, the look on his face, I said, that's really strange. And so then we go play, and I just forget about it. And years later, after I'd moved to New York, it's like 1970, and I had my first apartment, which was a basement. It was a hovel. It was really awful. But it was only $150 a month, so I was like, I didn't realize, thinking back now, like how lucky I was. I was 1970. So I'm in this place, and I'm up late at night because I was terrified to go out. Now, I'm from Los Angeles. I'm not the bravest person in the world, and New York, I didn't know anything about what life was like here. And the only times I went outside were to play music and to shop for groceries. Otherwise, I was completely petrified. And so one night I'm sitting at home, and I'm watching The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And he has Rob Reiner on. Maybe some of you know him from like Spinal Tap and things like that. And Rob was in this show called All in the Family, and he was like a star at the time. And so he's sitting there with Johnny Carson, and Johnny Carson says to him, he says, "So Rob, it must have been really great growing up in a house with your father." And his father was Carl Reiner, who was a famous comedian, writer, actor, everything. Carl Reiner was kind of a Renaissance man in his way, a really brilliant guy. And so Rob Reiner, he thinks for a moment, and he sits there and he says, "Well, you know, I didn't think anything was that unusual." He said, "I just thought everybody had Mel Brooks over for dinner." And I was watching it then, and I said, like, wow, that's kind of like what I felt like as a kid. You know, I thought everybody had Frank Sinatra over for Sunday barbecue, but no, nobody does. And so, you know, that part of my life was, it was really, you know, I guess it was a lot more different than I thought it was. But I think the thing is about the normal part of my childhood is that everything that, you know, we're doing today, just sitting here talking together, and things I do normally, like you know, writing emails and typing, all this stuff, I learned it all in my pre-college years. Everything. If you know, I was talking with Dave before about you know, my college years at UCLA, and that I did get a BA in composition and theory, which I still don't feel like I deserved, but I got it anyway. But the useful stuff all came from my public school education, and it's amazing to me today. Kind of sad that, you know, almost nobody goes to public schools anymore. So anyway, the musical part of things, like my father, he grew up really poor, like on the, like sort of around here, like in the Lower East Side.
Was he born in the U.S. or was he?
Yeah, he's born in yes. His parents, I think, were from maybe Poland or Czechoslovakia. I can't remember, and I'm probably, my sister's going to kill me for screwing that up, but I can't remember. But he grew up here on the Lower East Side, and they were really, really poor. And Dad, you know, he never graduated high school, so he wanted me to be everything that he couldn't be. Like, graduating high school was just huge to him, and so graduating college was like ridiculously huge. He wanted me also to be the musician that he never could be. My dad could play violin a little bit, and he also, even though he's a lyricist, he wrote the words to songs. So my whole life has been about, you know, words and lyrics and stuff. And Dad, he could play the piano. He could play all of his songs, anybody's, he could play it in F. And he played the same intro, no matter what the song was. He'd start on B minor 7 flat 5, B flat minor 7, A minor, D7, G minor, C, B flat over C, boom, plays the song. It's always the same. And so he, you know, shoved me at the piano at 5 and says, you're going to do this. And so, I mean, all I wanted to do was play sports. And sitting here today, it's really hard to say. Like, if you ask me, well, do you think you would have ended up here if he'd left you alone and you would have found your way to music anyway? I don't know. I really don't know. But so I spent 7 years playing the piano, and gradually I kind of drifted away from reading music. There was a woman teacher. She was kind of like a combination governess piano teacher. And every time I'd play something wrong, she had a ruler, and she'd whack me on the hand, which I got really tired of. So to survive, I became a really good mimic, and I would just watch her hands, and then I'd play it back. And I survived. But after 7 years, I couldn't do it anymore. And I remember going to my father, and I was really angry at me, and I just said, I can't do this. So now I'm just playing sports like a kid. And somewhere along the way, we get to a moment where the Beatles come along. And the next thing I know, all of my friends have guitars and basses, and they're playing. And I want to be a part of this, but I don't know how to be a part of it. So I said, well, how could I be a part of this? I said, the drums, that looks really easy. I'll do that. And so I asked my father, I said, like, you know, by then I'd been with my father to all these recording sessions, seeing like, I wish I could remember half of it. I saw all these amazing things. And so Dad knew all these musicians. And he says, okay, I'm going to assemble a kit of drums for you. They'll be mismatched, but you'll have the parts. And he said, but you have to take lessons. Oh God, lessons again. So now, he drives me out, or somebody drives me out to the Valley in Los Angeles, and it's one of those places like what do you call them? Like looks like a strip mall or something. And there's a little music school, and there's these little rooms, and so now I'm really excited, like my first drum lesson. And I go in there, and there's this little room, and there's 2 chairs, and there's a little like wooden thing with a block of wood and a rubber circle on it. And that's it. And so my teacher comes in, I meet him for the first time, and I say, so what's this? And he says, that's what we're going to start with. And he said, yeah, but where are the drums? I need to know. He says, oh, you're a long ways from that. So I went, oh my God. So I tried, you know, and we're starting paradiddles, all the rudiments. And eventually, you know, I couldn't do it. And so I quit that too, but I kept playing drums, and I was in this band, and I ended up, believe it or not, getting into what was a really famous surfing band at the time called the Shantays. They had this hit called Pipeline, which I didn't play on, but I was in after that. And suddenly, I'm a kid, and I'm playing, I'm touring, I'm doing all this stuff, and I really can't play the drums. And so, these guys, they showed me so many things, and they weren't just like a surfing band. You know, you see today, like I think Bill Frisell has recorded Pipeline, and a lot of people, that was the Shantays' big song. So, but the band, these guys who were into, you know, I don't know how many of you were guitar players, but they were playing all these Freddie King instrumentals. So I started buying all the Freddie King records and learning all these blues instrumentals in my head. I didn't have a guitar. And these guys, and the guitarists in the Shantays, they were the ones who turned me on to Wes Montgomery. And that changed my life. The first album I ever had of his was called Boss Guitar. And so I couldn't believe how great this was. And so now I start going to see all the jazz guys playing. I start going to see Wes Montgomery. I was like a groupie. I was telling Dave, I'd be the first kid out in line. I'd wait in line for 2 hours. Then Wes would drive up. You know, Wes didn't fly. And he'd drive up in his Cadillac with his brothers, Buddy and Monk, and there they'd be. And I'd help him bring his amp in. Then I would respectfully go back outside, wait in line for another couple hours. And then I'd go in, sit in the first row, and just stare with my mouth open all night. You know, I couldn't believe it. And eventually, you know, I started to talk with him, and we became, you know, friendly. But I still wasn't even playing the guitar. I was thinking the guitar, but I wasn't really playing it. But I could talk like I was. And so...
Hey, can I ask you a few
Sure.
things going back to your family life and your father? Did he consider being a lyricist as like a day job? He would go to work and write lyrics and come home, or he would be thinking about lyrics?
Well, I
dinner.
think that was his life. I mean, like my sister and I, we joke about this. The soundtrack of our life was this, you know, IBM typewriter going, and what's really, as much as I hated that sound because it was a reminder of all these disciplinary things that he had me doing, but the ironic thing is that there are moments in my life now where, like, I'm sitting at the computer writing emails with people and answering questions and doing the business we all do, and sometimes I look at myself and I go like, Jesus, I've become my father. The thing I never wanted to become. Here I am. I'm doing this, but I'm really grateful for my love of words and lyrics. It's like, as much as I didn't want to like, my father's music and those old songs and stuff, I remember years later, Miles Davis said a really great thing, and he said, amongst many great things he said, but one of the things he says, if you really want to play a ballad really great, you gotta know the lyrics. And so I realized, like, he's right. And I realized, like, damn it, I know these lyrics just because I've been growing up with them. And I didn't realize how much I was going to appreciate knowing the lyrics. So you have a lot of, younger players who, like, let's say, well, I love the way Bill Evans plays these tunes. And that's the first time they're hearing that tune. Bill Evans, Train, all those guys, they knew the lyrics to all. You can tell by the way they play. They knew all this stuff. And all those guys, you can hear it in the way they play. They all love Nat King Cole. If you just have all of Nat King Cole's stuff and listen to Nat King Cole singing, that's what inspired all of these guys. They all wanted to be like Nat Cole. And so I was really, really lucky. But if I can, like, just go back to the drums for 1 second. This is my favorite part of this story. So years later, many years later, I've now moved to New York, and I'm skipping a bunch of stuff, but like how I got here. But so I'm going to this recording one day, and Steve Gadd is a drummer. And so, by then we're all, really good friends. We're, this family of young guys who all come here at the same time. We all from different places. And, it's like a family. I know it's hard to believe, but it really was like that. And like the guys you're sitting with today, 10 years from now, you'll look back at this and you say, those guys, that was my family, those guys. I know them.
But for you, it was Steve Gadd and the Brecker Brothers and Don Grolnick and...
Yeah, it was some family. I mean, it was just, when I look at that, I feel like the luckiest guy in the world that I could have fallen into that. So anyway, back to this session. So now we're waiting for Steve's drums to arrive, because in New York, certainly then nobody, the amps were there, the drums would be coming from somewhere, because this is in New York. It's not LA where guys are going to have some cartage guy bringing stuff in. So there's just a snare drum sitting there. And so we're all, kind of waiting for the drums, and, there's only so much tuning up you can do and checking your stupid pedals and stuff. And so Steve sits down at the drums, there's 2 sticks, and he just starts to play. And I sat there transfixed, watching this guy with nothing, just a snare drum, and he made so much music. I mean, he must have played for it felt like 15 minutes. It was ridiculous. And in that moment, I went back to that stupid practice pad, and I said to myself, this is what that guy was trying to tell me. And I realized, I just wasn't ready to hear what he was trying to teach me. And I mean, I'll never forget it as long as I live. Remembering how I felt with that, stupid wood block and the rubber circle in the middle, and then seeing Steve Gadd do that, it brought everything, full circle for me.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about when I interviewed John Abercrombie. He was living in Boston in the 60s, and he comes to New York in late 69, something like that. And he said there were only about 5 guitar players in New York at the time, 5 or 6 guitar players that could play the new funky or fusion music and read and use a guitar pedal, a wah-wah pedal. And likely you weren't one of those guys, right?
I guess I was. I mean, yeah. John, it's remarkable happenstance. Like, John and I were here at the same time, and sometimes, you can be sitting with someone and you're playing music together. You're doing some project together. But you realize the guy I'm sitting next to, he's in this place here and here that I can only dream about. He's already there. I mean, I knew it. And we really liked each other, and we had a great rapport. We liked playing together, everything. But I knew he's like someplace that I don't yet understand. I was telling Dave, I didn't start playing the guitar until I was 19. So I started like really late. And the feeling I've always had, I have it tonight, like, is that I'm always behind. I'm behind everybody else. I'm always catching up, trying to find my way to somewhere. So we're sitting there together, and all of a sudden he starts to play I'm Getting Sentimental Over You, but a la Jim Hall. And I knew that record because it's with Art Farmer. It's one of those if you're a Jim Hall fan like we were, you know the Art Farmer records, you know the Paul Desmond records. It's like a Bible of a certain kind of guitar playing and music making, kind of a dignity in making music with other players, and so John, he played it. Not only did he play it beautifully, I mean, it sounded just like Jim Hall, except it sounded like John Abercrombie doing it. And it just struck me. It was a really powerful moment. Years later, I reminded him of that, and he said, oh, right, I remember that. But he was really a really profound guy. He said a lot of wonderful things. I think when you read interviews with him, you can see a really great musical mind at work. And it wasn't long after that when Sco was coming to town for the first time. I love this story. And through a mutual friend, I forget even who it was, but he contacted me. And we didn't know each other, and he said, listen, I'm coming to New York to play my first gig there with this drummer, Horace Arnold, spelled Horacee, Arnold. And so he says, a friend of mine said, you might be willing to lend me an amp for my first gig. So of course I don't want to lend anybody an amp, let alone somebody I don't know. But I guess back then I wanted to be a good guy, so I said, sure. So Sco comes and picks up my amp, and he brings it back and stuff. And this was the start, of a friendship that's lasted till today. So there were, John Abercrombie, Schofield, me, Ralph Towner. There were a bunch of us there. Later Bill Connors was here. There was a time, this is going to sound really crazy, and I didn't appreciate it, but I sure do now. I was living in Chelsea, like on 7th Avenue and 21st Street. And in my neighborhood, John Abercrombie was on 18th Street. Bill Connors was across the way on 21st Street, like me. Ralph Towner was somewhere close by. John McLaughlin was living in a loft on 23rd Street. And Sco was living downtown in Westbeth, just a little further down the village. So imagine going into your market and seeing John McLaughlin and saying hi and how you doing? I mean, it was impossible to believe, but that was my neighborhood for a time. I wouldn't say it was like that all the time, but it's just lucky, really, really lucky.
So let's back up a little bit now, because you told me a very interesting story just before about you decided you wanted to become a guitar player at 19. So that's before that you were a drummer, and so you became a student at UCLA.
Yes. So here I am. I'm still a drummer, and I'm a psych major at UCLA, and I'm doing really poorly in my first psych classes. At UCLA, you had to take Psych 1A and Psych 1B, and I think this is where they get rid of people like me. I mean, I wanted to help the world. I wanted to sit and listen to people's problems, and yes, I can straighten that out for you. That's what I thought being a psychologist was going to be. But next thing I know, I'm in these big survey classes with 500 people, and it's all about rats and Skinner boxes, and if the rat goes after the cheese, he'll find it A, 0.00001% of the. I was doing terrible at this. So by then I'm collecting all these jazz records, and I go home and I've got my set of drums in my mother's house at the time, and I just bought Wes Montgomery's album Movin' Wes, and on this album it was with brass. So the first tune that opens the album is Caravan, and they play it, and it's playing really fast, and Grady Tate is the drummer, and he just sounded kind of different than say Elvin or Tony Williams or Roy Haynes. There was something really appealing about. He had this snap, crackle, pop to his snare drum. It'd be whack. And I'm listening to this, and I got tears in my eyes, and I said, like, I'm never going to be able to do that. I can't play the drums. I can't. I have no talent. And I remember sitting, I went in the other room, I sat down on my drums, I sort of picked the sticks up, and I put them back down. And that was the last time, more or less, that I ever played. And by then I had bought a guitar because I wanted to communicate with the guys in the band better and be able to say E, A, B7. I can talk about that. So I had this, my first guitar was a Fender Mustang. And so all of a sudden, I said, well, I think I want to be the next Wes Montgomery. I mean, imagine the balls of somebody who's just quit playing the drums, and that's what they say. But that's what I said. And so, but how do I do that? So this starts this long adventure that somehow leads me to here. One of the things I was talking about with Dave, as I went along, I was playing professionally like in a year. I had no right to be doing the things that I was doing. I had met a guy at a fraternity party, a saxophone player. His name was Ron Finney, who you'd never have heard of. And so he invites me to this jam session. I go to this jam session somewhere in Los Angeles, and he liked the way I played. So the next thing, how it goes, it leads to one thing to another thing. The next thing I know, I'm meeting this guy, this great piano player named Clarence McDonald. And he's friends with this drummer, Mike Carvin, who's become, both of them have gone on to great things. And they had both just gotten back from Vietnam, which had, needless to say, had a profound effect on everything that they were about. But here we are, and we're playing together. And next thing I know, I get in this, Clarence asked me to join this group, the Friends of Distinction, who later on went on to have this hit record, Grazing in the Grass. And so now I'm playing in this band. I have no right to be in this band. I don't know what I'm doing.
Playing guitar in this band.
Yes, but there I am, me. And so the next thing I know, I'm at Clarence's house one day, and I'm just noodling around on the guitar, playing nothing. And he gets a phone call from this guy, who I didn't know what that was, this keyboard player named Phil Moore Jr. His father was Phil Moore, was a famous gospel vocal writer for choruses and stuff. And Phil Moore, I guess, says on the phone to him, "Who's that?" He says, "Oh, it's this kid, Steve Gadd." He says, "We tell this kid to come to this rehearsal. I'm making a record. I want him to come." And so Clarence says, "You got a recording, kid?" And I said, "You're kidding." He says, "No." So I go to this rehearsal. I'm so nervous I can't even explain to you how nervous I am. I walk in this rehearsal. I remember this is Los Angeles in 66, something like 67. And sitting at the rehearsal are two of the Jazz Crusaders. Six Hooper is sitting on drums, and this is one of my favorite bands at the time. And Wilton Felder, who played tenor sax, but also played, Fender bass, he's playing Fender bass. Now, I'm completely paralyzed with fear. I don't know, what am I doing here? Oh my God. So, I don't know, I just kept playing, and I ended up making this record. It was the first record, one of the first that I ever played on. What happens? Wilton Felder calls me and says, I'm making my first record as a leader on tenor sax, and I want you to play on it. Me? Yeah, you. And I said, okay. So I go, and I don't know how I survived this thing. And I go in there, and it was with a big band. They're all the best players in Los Angeles. You know, guys who were playing in the Don Ellis big band, all these great players. And Paul Humphreys is playing drums, with a fantastic drummer. I think the bass player was this guy, Bobby West. But anyway, there I am. And I survived the first session, but I was so paralyzed with fear that I actually called up the next day and made an excuse that I was sick and didn't finish the album. Because I felt like I don't belong here. I'm not good enough to be doing, even though they loved what I did. But so these were my first experiences where something happened. If you ask me today, well, why do you think that? I have no idea.
But let me ask you, how long had you been playing guitar when you
Jesus,
got that?
I bet I had hardly been playing a year and a half or something.
And did you know how to read?
Somehow I was figuring it out, but not like those guys.
So when you went to that recording session, did they just put the charts in front of you at the day of?
Well, one of the things I learned, which is probably not a good thing to learn, but you know, everybody oftentimes, especially with the guitar, you know, is so nervous about reading and everything that what you forget is that if you come early, there's always a certain amount of time before you actually have to play anything. Where usually the charts are sitting there, and you have time to sit, take a look at it, you know, survey the landscape of what you think it's going to be, and you can figure it out. Even if you can't, like, say, walk in, plop, chart, play. But I needed to sort of learn that, and I found, like, you know, being early is a really good thing. It can save your life sometimes. So.
So did you have solos, or were you exposed at all?
I was exposed, but it was really funny because this is, you know, again, the fusion movement at the time, well, it was like 68, 69, was just sort of beginning, and so you know, Wilton was recording tunes like All Along the Watchtower, so I knew how to, you know, handle things like that. It's not like playing Moment's Notice or something, you know, it was some other thing, but I was comfortable doing that. But I still, I didn't belong. But what I was gonna say was, you know, about to getting here somehow to New York, I started to transcribe things. Because you have to remember, in my generation, like, we didn't have a real book, we didn't have play-along CDs or play-along tracks on the internet, we didn't have YouTube, nothing. You know, if you didn't do it yourself, there were sort of like these jazz fake books that were floating around, but they were really poorly done. You know, the chord changes were all incorrect and stuff, and it was really hard to get them. So I started to transcribe things, and I was writing, and of course it was very sort of guitar-centric, where lots of Wes and Kenny Burrell and Grant Green and Jim Hall, and then of course all the great players of that time as well. And I get to New York, I'm skipping some things here, but and I fall in with this bunch of players, and Dave and I were talking about Dave Liebman, who was there at the same time, and was, you know, one of the kingpins of this family of players, and everybody, you know, revered Dave Liebman, had so much respect for him because he's such a great musician. And we'd go to all these jam sessions, and at these jam sessions, you know, be someone's loft, and there'd be these notebooks on someone's table or something, and I'd ask the guy, I say, well, what's that? He says, oh, it's all my transcriptions. And I look through it, I say, holy shit, he's doing the same thing that I did.
Yeah, but who was that?
Well, it could have been David, Mike Brecker. You know, the guys who were in this organization we all belonged to, Free Life Communications. It was about, you know, getting musicians together to, what do you call it? I guess, what's the expression? Network together. You know, play together, make concerts together, do things like that. And it was an incredible time here. But everybody had done the same thing. We all came to town with what was, in essence, our own real book. We had done it ourselves, and everybody had them. And, you know, so it was like, there was a sense of community that, you know, I didn't realize was possible, that we'd been doing the same thing, striving for the same thing. It reminds me, I was talking to Dave about when I used to spend time in those years with Michael Brecker, who was, you know, became, you know, one of my closest friends, and he had this loft, which Dave and I were talking about. The building it's a firehouse. You can still go by and see it. I think it's 119, no, maybe it's 147 West 19th Street. And in this building, when it started out, the three tenants were, I think, Chick Corea, Dave Liebman, and Dave Holland. And then these, can you imagine that? And then these apartments would rotate. You know, one guy moved out, and a great piano player, Carl Schroeder, moved in, and eventually Mike Brecker took one of the places. And so I'm over at Mike's, and I was just describing it to Dave. It's like, you talk about having nothing. It was just this empty, raw space, a mattress on the floor, one table, and on the table there was nothing but reeds and mouthpieces. That's all there was. And then there were strewn across the floor in various parts were Tropicana orange juice cartons. Just, you know, it was just ridiculous looking. I mean, how somebody could live that way, because his life was practicing. I never saw anybody in my life more dedicated, you know, to the saxophone and to his own dream, and a kind of excellence that most of us maybe think about, but you just can't even imagine. And so one of the things he shared, which I still love, and I tell like students of mine about this, depending on, you know, what they're interested in, but I had asked him about this other book that he had, you know, notebook full of pages, and I said, well, what's that? And he says, oh, it's nothing. And I said, but yeah, but because I was really curious, you know, because like I want to know everything. I'm like, how the hell do you end up playing like that? You know, where does that come from? And so he says, well, I'll tell you what. He says, what I've been trying to do is I try to write a blues every day. He says, even if it's nothing, even if it's, you know, doesn't sound any better than Bag's Groove or something, you know, I said, I do every day. I do something, and I said, I figure like if I do that for a month, maybe there's going to be one really good one in there. And so I said, wow, that's a really great idea. And so I started doing the same thing. You know, when go F, B flat, E flat, E, just try not to limit myself to, you know, doing it in F and B flat, and just go all over the place. And but I remember years later, this is many years later after that, we're in 78 or something, maybe 70. Now, some people, you know, sort of knew about us, and now we're going to play the Montreux Jazz Festival as part of the Arista All-Stars, which is going to include Mike Mainieri, Steve Jordan on drums, Tony Levin on bass, Warren Bernhardt on piano, and Mike and Randy, and me. And so Mike sheepishly brings in his first tune. It's a blues, and he you know, reluctantly passes it out to everybody. And of course, it's so hard to play that almost, nobody could play it. And he said, well, okay, let me slow it down. Anyways, this incredible blues. And if you want to hear it, at my website, I have these 2 pages. They're called Cahn's Corner 1, Cahn's Corner 2, and they're transcriptions and lead sheets and stuff. And the tune's called Uptown Ed. And in one of those pages, there's not only Mike's original lead sheet, and I rewrote it so it's a little more legible. And there's also a sound clip from that. It became a live album. But if you want to hear the guy's mind from that, just a little idea like write a blues a day, it's easy to access. It's right there. Well, I mean, I was in the original live version of the Brecker Brothers band. The first record, Bob Mann played guitar, was also in Dreams after John Abercrombie, and Bob is a fantastic musician and fantastic guitar player. That band was Mike and Randy. David Sanborn was playing alto, and Don Grolnick, Will Lee, Chris Parker on drums, and sort of later at times Sammy Figueroa drifted in on Latin percussion, and sometimes Ray Mantilla was there too. But mostly it was 7 guys. And when Sanborn left, the band went down to sort of 6 pieces. But it was a remarkable time.
But all you guys were kind of living together, and well, I guess Randy wrote most of the music.
Yes,
right?
Randy. I think that's why. It's really funny. The brother. I don't know how many of you guys have like brothers who are close in age to you or something, and do the same thing. Like I see sometimes like at these various sites, like young musicians. One guy's the sax player, the other's the bass player, or something like that. But the brother thing is so powerful, and when you're around 2 guys like that, where you wouldn't think that someone who can play like Michael Brecker could be intimidated by anything, but Randy's ability to compose, and that Randy was here before Michael, was already an established player in New York before Michael. I mean, the reverence that Michael always had for Randy was, and deservedly so, was immense. And so, Randy could sometimes talk Mike into doing things that weren't necessarily, artistically speaking, what Mike wanted to do, but the older brother, off we go. So it's a very, very, watching the 2 of them, it's a really powerful thing.
You talk about the friendships you made early on, because you have Randy and Michael and David Sanborn on your records as a leader throughout the years.
Yes, on the early records.
Yeah.
I mean, when I got signed to Columbia in 1977, I hope this you guys and ladies will find this encouraging. I was 30 years old when I got to do my first record as a leader, and I thought, I'm not saying I feel this way now, but at the time I thought the music we were playing in the Brecker Brothers band was like the best music you could be playing, because it wasn't like Weather Report, it wasn't like Mahavishnu, it wasn't like any of the early incarnations of Return to Forever. We were sort of the only horn band that was involved in this new music that really had this incredible little mini horn section with these 3 ridiculously great players, who each one was going to go on to, change things in our music for forever in a lot of ways. And so my goal after quitting the band was like, with my own records, I'm going to keep this sound alive. I'm going to keep Mike, Randy, and Sanborn together, whether they want to be together or not, and they're going to play on something on my records. And so the 3 records I did for Columbia, there was always a couple tunes that had that horn section on it, because I believed in it so much, and I believed in us as a family of players. I didn't want to let it go, and it's really it's remarkable to me. Like Dave and I, we had a nice dinner together, which was really great, and we were talking, and I told him, I said, you know, sometimes when you're doing something in its moment, and you really believe in it, I mean, it's the greatest thing there is, because that's what you believe. But years later, I sat back and I was trying to put things into perspective for myself. And I looked at it and I said, man, how could you have thought that? I said, look at that time period. Ralph Towner is recording Batik with Eddie Gomez and Jack DeJohnette in 1978. You want to compare that? The depth of musicianship, of music making with what you were doing? There's no comparison. You look at Keith Jarrett recording My Song. I mean, he's iconic. Same time, 1978. And you can go back way before that too. There are other, you know, great things too. Many of them. But I'm just looking at that time period. I mean, I'm just only mentioning a couple records. And it's so humbling to you know, put it in perspective about what you were doing and what other artists who were your friends, I'm not, Keith Jarrett's not a friend of mine, but that you know, artists you admire, what they're doing at the same time. And one of the other things Dave and I talked about, which is something I really believe is philosophically a really good thing to think about, and that's like periodically in your life, I usually think like maybe a place to start with, maybe when you're 25 or something, but you sit by yourself and you look in the mirror and you say, is this where I thought I would be by now? And sometimes it's like a really painful question to ask, because the answer usually is going to be, no, I think I thought something else would be going on by now, or something. And like, that's always been the thing for me. And like I said, I've always felt behind. So there's a certain level of disappointment with everything, you know, I've done, even though I feel proud of so much of it. It's not the way I thought things were going to unfold for me. And I think, you know, what the lesson, you know, in all of it is that, this I also said to David at dinner, was that if you had asked me at 19 years old, just picking up the guitar, I said, okay, Steve, I'm going to tell you that by the time you're sitting in a room with Dr. David Schroeder and a wonderful group of young people, and you're about to turn 72, you will have made this bunch of recordings, and that's what you will have done, and you will have done this, and that. Would you sign up for that now? And I would have said, oh man, yes, I think I would. Now, of course, that means, well, I'm not the next Wes Montgomery. I wasn't, you know, couldn't do that. But looking back on all of it, I feel like, you know, an amazingly lucky guy. Really, really fortunate.
Well, the thing you haven't talked about is your great contribution developing Latin jazz guitar playing. So how did you get into that?
Well, I'm really happy to talk about that. This, believe it or not, it actually kind of goes back to my father again. You know, in our house, there's music around all the time. And in the 50s, in our beloved USA here, sometimes not so beloved like right now, but anyway, the whole USA went cha-cha crazy. Everybody, you know, you see these people in these goofy dresses, you know, white people, you know, dancing, wanting to learn how to do the cha-cha-cha. And so, of course, a lot of my father's songs were suddenly being recorded as cha-chas. And so he comes home one day with this version of Peggy Lee singing a song of his called Come Dance With Me, which I loved. And I remember it was like one of the first times I'd ever heard like the cha-cha bell, the cowbell, going, it sounds like it's playing quarter notes. And I went, wow, this is really great. I really like this. And so I just always remembered that. I didn't relate to it as that's a cha-cha or anything. It just, there was something about the feeling generated by that. And at this time, we also talked about this, you had like pop records starting to use the cowbell, like Mickey and Sylvia, Love is Strange. Cowbell is huge in it. And you look at pop music, all the Beatles songs that have a cowbell, like You Can't Do That, or I could name probably 10, 15 of them like that. You know, Rolling Stones, Honky Tonk Woman, all these, there are a million of them. Low Rider, tons of songs with the cowbell. And so it always reached me. And then somewhere in the 60s, there were like 4 albums that really changed my life. One of them, the main 3 were Herbie Hancock's Inventions and Dimensions, which is a record of his that very few people pay attention to, maybe because they look at it and see Willie Bobo on drums and they go like, well, that's not Tony Williams, it's not Elvin, why would I want to buy this? But it's the most incredible record because it's almost like free Latin music. It changed my life. It opened up this sense in me about what music making can be about. Because he wrote on the liner notes in days where you had these big LPs and you could read this Herbie's story of the record, and he was saying like I didn't have any music. I just walked in with these little sketches and I talked it over with them and we just played. And I felt like if I could do that someday, something like that, I'd be so happy, if I could do something like that. So that was one huge record for me. Then there was Grant Green's The Latin Bit, which I loved. It was important to me. And then the other big one was Cal Tjader's Soul Burst, which I think was in 66 or 67, which featured a very young Chick Corea playing piano, but playing piano in Latin music like, nobody had ever heard anything like that, because it was this mixture of like his influences of McCoy, Bill Evans, Herbie, all these people in the way he was, but he was playing Latin music. And it had this sense of harmony that was the way I heard things. I said, that's how I want to play the guitar like that. I want to be capable of doing something like that. So there were those 3 records. And the 4th one was a record also by the Jazz Crusaders, which was arranged by Claire Fisher. He did everything. And that was the only record of these 4 I mentioned that actually had the full complement of Latin percussion. Timbal, conga, bongo, everything was in there. No skimping on cowbells. It's all there. So those 4 records, really changed my life. And then when I came to New York and started doing these gigs, Steve Gadd was in a couple of my first bands. What kind of nerve did I have to have Steve Gadd in my bands? But Steve Gadd was, had a cowbell mounted on his bass drum. And he was already doing this kind of stuff that you would hear later on these Chick Corea albums. And so when we're playing this tune of mine, and I didn't ask him to, suddenly he launches into that, and I went, oh my God, that's incredible. We're playing Latin music. But of course we weren't. But so that became a feature like on all these records that I would do in the 70s with Steve playing drums. I always wrote one tune that would have him doing something like that, because I loved it so much. And this continued. And then it's funny how we're tying all this together somehow. It's a miracle. So in 1980, I got dropped by Columbia Records, like maybe 50 of us, and they put out this series of albums called The Best Of. So here I am. I've only made 3 records in my whole life, and all of a sudden, The Best of Steve Gadd. I'm like, how's that possible? I haven't done anything to merit The Best Of, but there I am with The Best of Billy Cobham, and The Best of Tom Scott, and The Best of Maynard Ferguson, and The Best of Benny Golson. I mean, it was insane. And they put all these records out because they were trying to condense the catalog and get rid of these albums that they couldn't sell. And they called it as a joke, the Brown Paper Bag series, because all these all the album covers, if you go looking for them, they all look like a brown paper bag. So now I'm beside myself with, whoa, it's like, oh my God, my dream is finished. I'm finished. It's 1980. How can this be possible? Like, I'm done. It's over. And so I'm in my apartment, and at the time, my next door neighbor was Warren Bernhardt, the great piano player. And suddenly, we go do this gig down at the Brecker Brothers club called 7th Avenue South. And on this gig, it's like a clash of generations in a sense. Mike Manieri's playing vibes, Warren's playing piano, I'm on guitar, and who do we have on bass and drums? Young Marcus Miller and Omar Hakim. And so we're sitting there and we're playing, Mike's music, and it's really wonderful music. And every night I'm sitting with these 4 great players, 2 guys who were older than me, Mike and Warren, and then 2 guys who are amazingly younger than me. And the 4 of them are kicking my ass 6 ways from Sunday, every tune, every 2 seconds. And I'm getting so depressed. It's like I hated the way I was playing. I hated my sound. And every night, Warren and I would come back home, and we'd sit in my living room or his living room, and we'd talk till the sun came up about stuff, about music. And he said, listen, he said, I understand everything you're feeling right now. And he says, what I would tell you is that this is going to pass. You're going to get through this. You may not see how you ever get there, but it's going to happen. You just don't stop. Just keep going forward. And so the next thing I know, I put away my Telecaster, which I was playing then. I never took it out again, I don't think. And so I started playing all these tunes that were things that inspired me when I was a younger guy. I started playing all these Monk tunes and Horace Silver and what else? Wayne Shorter, all these tunes. And Warren hears me through the door, and he says, "You got to record that." He says, "I never heard anybody playing the Monk tunes like the way you're playing them now." I said, "Really?" And he says, "I'm telling you." So I put together, this is the first time I did it, $6,000 of my own money, and I went in on a weekend and with some help from a friend who was an engineer, and recorded this album that became Evidence. And it was like a cleansing, it was like going back to just playing something acoustic and really simple, and it just opened me up in a way I wasn't expecting. So the next thing I know, I'm sitting around with the usual question, well, that was okay, and now what? And so I have no answer for that. Somehow, it's funny how Mike Manieri keeps coming up. I had done this recording with Mike, which I really, it's one of my favorites with him. It's called Wanderlust. And on this album were, of course, the Brecker Brothers, Don Grolnick, Marcus Miller, Peter Erskine was playing drums, and of all people, Manolo Badrena, a great percussionist who many people remember from Heavy Weather, one of the greatest musicians I've ever known in my life, but a complete but beautiful maniac, a real lunatic. And so I'm around Manolo for like 3-4 days, and I'm saying to myself, like, I need to be around somebody like that, because he has something that I can't understand. He's coming from a place about music making that I need to understand that. So now I'm thinking about starting this band, but I have no music. So I don't know, I still don't remember where I got this idea. I call up Steve Jordan, Anthony Jackson, and Manolo, and I said, will you guys be willing to just like jam? And I have this idea, and I think it could be good. And so the next thing I know, we're starting to jam up this music, and Steve Jordan is doing all these things with the cowbell, and Manolo's there. And so I came home, and I'm like, my spirits were so uplifted by what I was hearing. I make cassettes of everything we did. Like in those days, you just took it home. You didn't put it right up on YouTube and say, here, listen to my rehearsal. This wouldn't have happened. So I started, listening to the pieces that we'd improvised, and I started editing it in my mind and making more organized pieces of music. And then I called this guy, this wonderful guy, George Braun, who recently died, sadly. And I said, George, I've got something. And I told him who was involved, and I said, I'd love to record this before we know what we're doing. I said, if we wait too long, we're going to know what it won't be the same. And so he made some phone calls, and next thing I know, we're going in the studio and recording this album that became Eyewitness, which is the first of 3 that we did together. It's 1981. And that record, I think, changed my life. Again, everything that's happening now, in a lot of ways, started with that record. And I remember after we did it, years later, and I sadly didn't know anything about speaking Spanish then, but Manolo always used to tell me, he says, man, he says, you wouldn't believe what's happening with these records in, South America and the Caribbean, in Cuba. And I said, what's happening? He says, people think this is like something really different. I said, really? And he says, I'm telling you. Of course, I didn't believe him. And it wasn't until years later that I started to run into people, especially when I could speak Spanish much better, that he was telling me the truth. So that's, in a sense, where it started. I think what's happening now is, I think I guess this is the important part of the story, is like, I was looking at the landscape of say, where the guitar is in jazz. And listen, we all know who the great players are, and there's so many of them. They're the guys who are around my age. And then there's all these guys from 40 on down who are also or more ridiculous. Amazing, the guitar is in such fantastic shape. But I looked at it and I said, well, if I keep doing, what I've been doing, that's okay. I guess I do it with my own personality. But I looked over here and I said, like, there's nobody playing, Latin jazz on guitar with the full complement, all the right percussion, timbal, congo, bongo, hand percussion, everything. And so I said, like, I'm going to go do that, take the same music that I've been playing, that I've been interpreting and arranging, the same things, Ornette tunes, Monk tunes, Wayne Schroeder, the usual stuff, but I'm going to do it this way. And it's been the most rewarding thing for me, because I'm just sort of off in this, even if nobody's paying attention to it, I'm just off in this place all by myself. And I'm still playing the guitar kind of the same way. The concept is the same. Well,
I should have said this at the start, but I saw that Jazz Life magazine in Japan had listed the 22 greatest guitar players, right? And you were among that list, and I think you've earned that. So it's a pleasure having you here tonight.
Thanks, Dave. I don't know. I like I said, I see myself. When you see yourself in a list of 22 guys, and there's, Wes and Kenny Burrell and Django and...
What number were you, do you remember?
I don't think it was not necessarily, it was just 22 guys. It's a really strange number, like why not 25 or why not 20?
Well, I have one more question for you tonight. We always ask, do you have any wisdom for all the younger people who are interested in following in your footsteps or finding their own path in music?
Well, I wish I could, put it into a succinct phrase, but I think, I think when we're trying too hard to, like, say, find our own voice. What is my voice on my instrument? I think that searching for that often causes more problems than getting you closer to arriving at it. And I think I think the best thing to do is just to keep playing, not worry so much about Is this my voice? Is this my voice if I step on this pedal? Is this my? I'll change guitars again. Is this? Do I have my voice now? You wouldn't believe how many guitars I changed, thinking the guitar is the problem. It was wow when I finally realized, no, you're the problem. It's not the guitar. But I think what really helped me the most when I was in that band with Steve Jordan and Anthony and Manolo, the best thing was I had these ideas of what I wanted them to do, and they all ignored me all the time. The first thing they would do is like, almost without saying it, they say like, we're not going to do that. And so I had to like loosen up. I had to like, and in the context of that band was the moment like I stopped being just a guitar player, and I feel like I started down this path to being a music maker. And I think that's where you want to be. And if you look at like, my peers, the ones that, I've been here for the longest time with, why, I love these guys and I have such great respect for them, like John Abercrombie and Ralph Towner and Sco. I don't look at that as guitar music. It's music. It happens to be led by a guitar player, but they're all wonderful music makers. It's about, playing together. It's about having a musical conversation with your bandmates. Whatever it's not that easy. To just say, well, I'll pick this one, and this one, and we'll play together, and it'll be magic. Or say, well, okay, I'll hire McCoy, Jimmy Garrison, and Elvin, and the shit's going to be magical. Not necessarily. You can't recreate magic just because you have these names. So I think that's the most important thing, is just concentrate on, making music with the people you're playing with, and don't worry so much about, is my voice happening here? Is my voice being heard?
You'd mentioned that you were started off as a psychology major at UCLA, and I think you have a passion for that, because I think you actually helped many of us tonight understand the process. So I want to thank you.
Thanks.
And Steve Gadd, everybody.